Welcome back to Shadows of the Workshop, a series where I take a deep dive into the fascinating stories of prop makers and creators of all walks of life. Today, I am truly honored to be hosting a true legend in the industry. Our next guest is a visionary, a creator, a master of world building, also an Academy Award winner. His iconic designs have transported us to distant galaxies, from the sweeping sands of Tatooine to the legendary cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. As a pioneer in prop making, he has brought to life some of the most iconic and most beloved characters in Star Wars, from the mighty bowcaster even to the first ever lightsaber. Without his creations in Star Wars truly just wouldn't be the Star Wars that we grew to love. So everybody, sit back and relax, and let's walk through the shadows of the workshop with Roger Christian. All right, so everyone, we are back in the shadows of the workshop with the legend himself, Roger Christian. He is an Academy Award-winning production designer and set decorator, joining us to share his incredible journey in prop making and set design, particularly in Star Wars. Roger, thank you so much for joining us. How have you been?
Not at all. It's great. Thank you. And good to be here and meet everyone.
Thank you. So Roger, take us back in time to, what really sparked your interest in prop making and set design.
There's a common denominator actually amongst film directors is I had a terrible time at school. I hated it. And in my era, all teachers hated children. They were there to punish us all the time. The only redeemer of that was the art master who took me under his wing and really encouraged me. And he obviously saw a talent, or he saw something there. So the strict upbringing after the World Wars and things with my father, I managed to escape school without telling my father. I got into a technical school in Reading where I lived, where they did, because we had to do O-levels, they're called. That's the first exam you get. I only got 2 at school. I got out into this tech college, which was an art school, but they redid everything. And I got 6 more O-levels just being treated like a human being in there. Got out of there, got into Main Art School in Maidenhead. And I was following that kind of path. A mate of mine at art school had bought a Mark 7 Jag for 10 shillings. And thought we were kings. We drove to London one day to go to the cinema in the big Odeon, Leicester Square. And the first film we saw was Dr. Zhivago. And it blew me away so much. I'd had a weird out-of-body experience when I was a child, and I had another one in that cinema. I just rose out of my body when the funeral was on and the music was rising, and the boy was by the grave and the winds blew off the trees and everything. And something happened. It was an epiphany. And that film is the greatest kind of love story ever told. It's the Russian Revolution. The film is magnificent. It's David Lean, of course. And in the afternoon, we went to see the opposite, which was a film called, it was a Claude Lelouch film. I can't remember the name of it. God. Anyway, it
was a very long time ago. I get it.
No, I know this film so well. It was almost filmed like a contemporary commercial, and it was a drive in a Mustang with Louis Trantillon and Anouk Aimée driving from Cannes up to Paris and it was all done with jazz music. It was amazing. And I remember coming out, we had girlfriends with us and arguing. They were going down on it. I was saying, this is amazing. It's revolutionary cinema and everything. And I thought, you know what? What is this? I got to join the cinema. I got to be part of this, knowing nothing. And then to survive, I got a job near Reading where I lived. We used to put up marquees all over the south of England. I mean, these are huge. We would work 7 a.m. till 10 at night, 7 days a week, and earn lots of money. One day, putting up tents, I saw a prison camp, and I went over there and said, "What are you guys doing?" And they said, "We're building a prison camp." And I said, "Well, is it real? This looks so real." And they said, "No, it's a movie." They said, funny enough, an old homeless guy comes past every day and gives us food. He thinks we're in prison, but we're building it for Pinewood Studios for a movie, which was next door. So next lunchtime, I got under the fence because we weren't allowed in. With a mate of mine, scrambled under the fence, went in, and for some reason the doors were open, but they were filming one of the first James Bond movies. And I think the smell and lights and the look of it and everything, I went, oh my God, I got to be part of this. And I went into the prop room, and there were all the gold bars, and I was picking them up. And, oh, these are plaster. Wow, this isn't real, but it looks real, So that was the key. Got nowhere writing letters. I knew nobody. I was a kid from Reading. I knew nobody, had nobody ever. Most people in the industry had relatives they could get through. I knew nobody. I wrote letters after letter. No one responded. And eventually one producer in Pinewood kindly sent me a letter, and he said, "You've done art school. You should get into the art department. It would be easier way for you. And but you'll probably have to do architecture because that's how it works in the art department." In my naivety, I thought, right, I've got one A-level. I applied to Oxford School of Architecture, which is the nearest place, and I got in. I got accepted. And I had to do an A-level in economics by post, which I did. And I managed to I scrimped through with the lowest mark that got me in, and did 2 years of architecture. And I became very good friends with the head of the college, and he gave me my diploma, and he said, I really think you should go and do what you really want to do, which is try to work in film, because you're going to be bored stiff the next 2 years, because it's all, it's all like concrete mixes and stresses and all of that kind of stuff. So I would go and do it. You've done the creative part. So I did. I went, I worked. I had no money. I was back at home. They wouldn't give me any. I eventually sold a car that I had because I needed the money. Had to hitch a lift home. Got picked up by an architect who I got talking to, and he said, "Oh, you know what? One of my staff worked on Cleopatra. It was such a huge movie. They were hiring architectural draftsmen, anyone they could get their hands on to go and work on it." He said, I'll ask him. That led to a interview with a man called Charlie Bishop at EMI Studios. And I went with my whole folder of stuff, and Charlie looked at it and he said, "You know what, I would take you on, but we're just finishing Department S." It was a big TV series. So I've arranged for you to have an interview down at Shepperton. Can you go? And I said, yeah, of course. So I went down. My interview was with John Box, who designed Dr. Zhivago.
Wow.
And I sat there, he looked at all my work, everything, and he folded. He said, "Look, I'll give you a job. You'll have to be tea boy. Are you willing to come and make the tea?" And I said, "I don't care. Yes, anything." I was in. I mean,
I will feed you if you want me to.
So but he was brilliant. He closed my folder and he said, "Here's the film industry. Okay, you're standing in the desert. You got a bottle of green ink in your pocket, and there's an aeroplane next to you. And there's a cloud of dust. The director and producer arrive and they go, 'Wow, this is great. Can you have the airplane red by tomorrow morning?' And he said, you either do it or you talk your way out of it on that spot with an alternative. That's the film industry. And I mean, this is stood my kind of ground from then on. It was the most valuable lesson I ever had. So I made tea, and the English drink tea. And this was a fairly big art department. And John Box really mentored me. Now, here I am with hair down my shoulders, jeans, Cuban boots. Every weekend I was in cinemas. We had 12 art cinemas all over London. I was in watching every European master. I worshipped Kurosawa, Bergman, Tarkovsky. And here I am in an art department of suits and ties going, get your haircuts, you've got to shape up, you don't understand, this is a business, and you'll get on and then you'll get to the drawing board and all this stuff. And I was having none of it. And the sets, this was a film called Oliver, the musical, and the sets that John did were just outstanding. The old alleyways and the canals underground. I used to get out to go and look because I wanted to learn, and I would be sent back saying, if you leave that art department again, you'll get fired. You don't come out of it. It was that kind of, so I would have none of it. and John Box really mentored me. So I made sure they knew I could draw everybody. And then I thought, you know what, I can't do this anymore. So I made worse and worse tea and coffee, and I could see them grimace with this tea and go, oh God, what's going on? So I got promoted. It was a risk. I could have got fired, but I think John preserved me, and I got promoted. And then so I drew up one of the canals, and that was this. So there, part of the story is the first prop I ever made, because somehow I was given Fagan's box that he kept all the money in. And there was a musical number with the box open where he had to count all the coins. And they just gave it to me and said, here, you can do this. So I think this is, everything from Star Wars on, everything. My instinct, even then, I thought, I've got to make this look real. I took it home. I got polishes. I got little blow torches, burnt it down. I kept on and on until I felt this looked like an absolutely antique real box. I didn't stop. And it's there, it's in camera now. And he was doing his stuff on the top of it, and it looked great. And that was the first thing I ever did. And in a way, it kind of set the whole benchmark of my career when you look at it.
Now, when you were making that, were you kind of like stressing out, like, this is my one shot, like was it that going through your head, or was it just like chilled, laid back, let's just try it, wing it, see what happens?
I just wanted it to look absolutely real. I thought, this is going to be used. It's going to be prominently featured in the film. And I thought, this has to look real. I cannot look bad. So I somehow, when I was young, when I wrote the book Cinema Alchemist, I had to go back and analyze where did all this come from. And I realized then my dinky toys to me always looked too shiny and new, and I used to paint them down and age them. And I had a camera, and I go in the garden and make little shots of them, trying to make them look real on dirt roads and stuff. So there was a definite instinct for that kind of reality. I thought cinema should look real, There was a definite instinct kicked in there. And my second job, which all of the art department, except for John Box, all told me you'll never work again. It was for television. I was offered a role as an assistant designer for the original ITV, which was closing down in 9 months, and they were forming it into this new whole big rediffusion. So there was a 9-month contract available for somebody as an assistant, and I took the job. I was told, you'll never work again. Working for television is so below us, There was a definite attitude in the film industry at the time. This job I took on, the designer was wonderful. I was down in Ightham Moat, which is a beautiful historic place in Kent, doing this TV series. And he turned to me after a week and he said, listen, you know what you're doing. I have to leave and go build all the sets. Can you just handle the whole film there from now on? And that was it. I was handling the dressing, the props, everything, making sure everything was all right and loving it. I mean, this was where I thought I'd lay. And as soon as I came back, I was offered Randall and Hopkirk Deceased, which is a huge cult TV series now. The designer of that was Charlie Bishop, who first offered me the job. And he's the one who got me set decorating on it. And Charlie actually was the art director in charge of the Ice Palace in Zhivago. He did the whole, that was a massive endeavor, just that one setting on it. So I learned a lot. And that then, I just kind of worked my way through then, because I was very young and made a set decorator. It's another story, that one. The set decorator on the series had a mental breakdown. They were really tough schedules. And he had a breakdown, but they told me he was never coming out. So I was asked, I'd drawn up a set of a mad artist on the drawing board. And when they were going to go to shoot it the day after, I was called to the set by the producer, the director, Charlie, everybody. And I thought, oh, God, they're going to tell me I drew this. They can't shoot it. And it was the opposite. The director said, this is the best set we've ever had on this film. And they said, would you like to set decorate from now on? Because we don't think the one's coming back, the one we had. So that was it. I'm very young. I was off and running. And I worked then. There was a wonderful younger designer, Philip Harrison. We did some crazy films. One of them, Final Program, which was brilliant sets. And so I was getting an alternative, fast journey through the film industry, because normally you went in as T-boy, you eventually got onto the drawing board, you'd spend years on a drawing board, you'd eventually go into a next, and by the time you're kind of, all the creativity is almost smashed out of you, you get maybe to design something. And I kind of really hero worship the Elliot Scott, who was an amazing designer, and the ones like Michael Powell did Black Narcissus, films like that. I could see there was a creative kind of industry going on, so I was able to be part of that. I did some pretty interesting work, which then led to me being asked if I would go to Mexico. And it was April and it was snowing, and I'd just finished a movie, and this man from Fox said, would I go and join John Barry in Mexico on a film called Lucky Lady? They needed help. So I went, and John's I'd not met, but he designed Clockwork Orange. Just an amazing, like John Box, I probably worked for two of the best ever designers. I mean, John Box did Lawrence of Arabia. As I said, very humble, didn't really paint very much, just had people to do everything, but had an eye. Amazing. John,
both of them, their vision for what they wanted to create was just amazing. Just like yourself. I mean, it was just amazing to see.
It was. I mean, John Barry did Superman way beyond its time in what what they did with art and special effects and stuff. So I was very lucky. And during Lucky Lady, Gloria and Willard Hike wrote Lucky Lady, and they wrote one of the films for George Lucas and worked with him on some of the characters for Star Wars. They became huge friends. They were wonderful, the two of them. And they said that they told George Lucas to come and see us because Fox, Universal, MGM, they'd all lost their audiences, so they all decided to take on young directors. Like Universal got Spielberg, MGM got Coppola. Alan Ladd chose George, who worked in with his worst nightmare, a children's science fiction fantasy, and there was no box office for that anywhere. It was dead. But they analyzed the film, the board, and said, well, this film's going to make $12 million. So they divide that by 3, and they said to George, if you can make Star Wars for $4 million, we'll make it. Gary Kurtz's budget was 8 in America, and there were no studios free, and it happened in UK. We were half the price, and there were studios free. So Gloria and Willard said, you keep talking about this kind of spaghetti Western in space. John and Roger are making old Mexican buildings look like 40s buildings. It was a film about running. So one day George appeared with Gary Kurtz, and I was dressing an old salt factory, making it look real. George picked up a shovel and was shoveling salt with me. That's typical George, while we talked. And he told me, I want to make this science fiction film. And I said, look, I have to be brutally honest. I'm an avid science fiction reader, and I've never connected to any science fiction film. They're all overly designed. They don't look real. There's been no interest in it. And he said, no, I want to make a spaghetti Western in space. And so I said, well, to me, it's like you have a spaceship. It's dripping oil. It's been repaired. It's got, in a garage. I only realized when I later got back into London in August that I'd actually described the Millennium Falcon exactly.
See, that there is amazing. That's awesome.
So, yeah, I mean, what does Luke say in the script? It's just a pile of junk.
Yep.
And I was doing that in Mexico, where I had to do these like hippie boats. And in Mexico, we were in Guaymas. I mean, there was nothing in it. It was so cheap, the country, that the whole city was surrounded by slums, favelas. I used to drive in the truck with a gang of Mexicans trying to find scrap and stuff to make this boat look real, which we found at the end on Indian reservations, all sorts of places. And so it kind of, everything led to this movie, really, where we arrived in London and were told, well, the budget for the whole film is $4 million. So I think I had $200,000 to do this entire film. And in those days, the set decorator was everything. I had to do the weapons, the sets, the locations, the robots, the vehicles. I mean, everything came under set decorating. There were no split ups like now. And I
bet that was extremely stressful too.
It took me days to break down. I used to break every scene down. What is required? What are the sets required? What are the props required? What are the special things required? And what do I think I should add into it? I looked at it and said, well, I can't do this. It's not. And Fox would not greenlight the movie. So George and Robert Watts hired a little tiny studio in London. We were in there for 4 months with just John Barry, myself, and art director Les Dilley, George and Gary, and Robert Watts. That was it for 4 months. And the first thing that John Barry came down and said, you've got to build an R2-D2 that works, because if we don't have one, there's no way to do it. There's no CGI in those days. There was primitive radio control that kind of the special effects. He was good, John Steers, but very bumptious and always, I'm going to be the best. It's going to be amazing. It was always like that. And we thought, this is not going to work. So that was the really crux of whether this film would go ahead or not. And based on our conversations around the Daleks, who had people inside them, we thought we could, because C-3PO they'd made in Metropolis in 1927. They managed to get it to walk 3 steps. We knew now, like all that time later, we get somebody inside it, we could make that work. That wouldn't be a problem. It was R2-D2. So George hired Kenny Baker. We measured out from the Ralph McQuarrie drawing that he had to be 4 foot high. Kenny was 3'8". Bill's a friend of mine. He was a carpenter, and he did everything for Monty Python films. Now, you talk about low budget. They couldn't even afford horses. They had coconut shells on Holy
no
Grail.
Budget for that one.
So then Bill said to Robert, well, we got money to buy wood? No, there's nothing. I haven't got anything, sorry. So he had some wood at home in the garage, so he brought that in. He scrounged around this little Lee Studios and found a few more bits of timber left over from another movie and built the body in wood, which there's the picture of it, with George standing by it. That's the only picture of it. Built that in wood. He said, Roger, I can't do a top. So the lighting company was next door. So I went down. They had a scrap pile where everything was thrown out, and I found a lamp top, which I measured, and it was exactly right. So I brought that back, and Bill hollowed part of it out and stuck that on top. And then he said, George wanted those little arms on the front. I said, I can't do that. Here, gave me a penknife and said, go and carve that at home tonight. So I did. I sat at home, carved out the first one. And I thought, you know what, to show George, I better dress it up a bit. So I went to Trading Post, who were a big hire company, but they had boxes of old army stuff, ex-military. So I grabbed a box of bits and pieces and took it home to the studio. And there were those lights from the decorator. So I stuck those in because they looked a bit like the Ralph McQuarrie additions on his helmet, and there's one on the body, and I had a grill and I stuck that on the front, and we got George down, and then Kenny couldn't move it. He could kind of just about move the head, but he couldn't walk. We built it so that you couldn't see the legs, but they went through the side of R2-D2 into the feet area on those side leads. So then we thought we got Kenny to bring in his boots, and we stuck those in the bottom, and he still couldn't move it. And part of the and we were getting pretty desperate.
I bet.
Part of the junk pile I don't know why I picked it up. There was a fighter pilot's harness, and so Bill Harmon stapled it inside the wooden body. And in fact, Kenny then could take the weight of it. He put R2-D2 on like a rucksack. And with George and Gary there, he took 3 steps before he fell over. But that was it. There's the most defining moment on Star Wars, that we had a movie.
I bet that was so funny too. Like you're stressed out. Oh yeah. He's moving, he's walking, and then he falls over, and I bet all of you just like lost it.
Yeah, we all ran over because we could hear Benny shouting inside, Kenny going, get me out of here. So we picked him up. But and Kenny, fortunately, and we partly chose him for that, partly he was very strong, and partly he was a member of a comedy duo called the Mini-Tones with Jack Purvis. They told jokes about being small people, and so he had a humor which was vital. Really, we knew for gonna have to go forward with this thing. And then I kind of thought, you know what, I can't, all these weapons, I can't afford it. And we knew the schedule, we were going to have to start in March, so I knew we'd have no time to make anything through the workshop. So I thought, okay, I'll go to the gun hire shop and Baptists were the only one in London. They could armour World War II, World War One, whatever you wanted, charge of the Light Brigade. They had acres of weapons. And I knew the owner, so I said, Peter, I got to do some weapons, and so I'm going to make this blaster up. And I got a Sterling submachine gun, which I could have used. I just think it's a sci-fi weapon to me on its own. And I got the buyer who was going to come on board with us. He got me some T-strip, and there it is. I stuck that round the barrel. And then I dug around Baptist, and I found all these boxes of the night sights that I put on the top. That they were used in the army, the scopes. And I thought, oh, those are cool. So I stuck them on. All this originally was with super glue. And I didn't like the clip because it was like a curved automatic firing, and that gave it away. So, and they had a little tiny clip. So I put that in. And I thought, that's pretty cool. That's a weapon. It looks used and old. And as a bonus, it could fire, on single shot. And then I thought, well, George is going on about Han Solo being a Western hero type of character. So I found the Mauser, which was a German pistol. And I could have used that as it is. I thought, wow, this looks stunning. It's got a wooden stock. But again, I thought, okay, I'll change it a bit. I found the flash hider for the front of another gun and managed to stick that on the front. I got, again, more of these scopes, which I thought they really changed it. And I put that on. I got those two, and I thought, well, this will be it. So I called John Barry over and said, you better come with George. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is it. I'm on the right path or I'll get fired.
I'm going to be back to a tea guy.
Yeah. So George loved them. That he came and he stayed with me, actually. And he made Princess Leia's gun with me. He got covered in super glue with me. But we made that gun together because he saw the process. That kind of established a silent communication, because George never spoke that much. He just expected whoever he'd hired to bring it. And that set up, I was on the right path for everything on Star Wars then. And we continued. We got C-3PO. We had a sculptress come in, Liz, and she did the first Stormtrooper helmet. She then did C-3PO's. And that's an interesting story because Bill made her 10 or 12 armatures, and she built all these different versions of the head, kind of based around Ralph McQuarrie's, who Maria was female on Metropolis, and we wanted him to be male. And we got down to two heads that we were looking at, and then standing around talking about it with George and Gary, we got down to one head, and he was more like the Ralph McQuarrie with little slit eyes, and it just didn't look right. So in Britain at the time, you had a tea ladies. They would come round with sausage and egg sandwiches and tea.
Oh, that sounds good.
So Bill and Liz in their workshop, they had some pennies left over, the change, and George actually picked up one of the pennies and stuck it in the clay, stuck the other one in, and there was C-3PO. Exact look, and it's exactly the size of the pennies. And that became C-3PO, and then I was hunting around Baptist for Chewbacca, and Ralph had drawn Chewbacca with a blaster, and I happened to find the bowcaster with the balls on the end, and I thought, oh, this is cool. So I showed George and said, I think this would suit Chewbacca better, which George agreed, so he changed it for that. And I was very careful to kind of try to give the characters the right weapons. So the Tusken Raiders, they shouldn't have blasters. They're desert people, they're villagers and raiders. So I found the gaffy stick, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I'd never seen one before, but I always altered everything I got to give it a little Star Wars kind of feel, you know. So I dug around, found an old mace hand, the end, and I got the end of the gaffy stick drilled out, and I stuck the mace in the end, and that gave it a different look. So that's the one. That's the one on film for Tusken Raiders. And I found as well an old kind of, it was a blaster that was like a cannon firer for grenades. It had a big end, and I thought that's pretty cool. So I gave them that. That was an old wooden stock. So I was differentiating each group of characters or character with a weapon. And then finally, Fox in December finally agreed a budget with Gary. And we moved to EMI Studios in the January. Now, I tell this story because I think it shows the attitude at the time. So the first thing they said to me was, let's put all the weapons, everything you've made, and there was quite a few then, on a table, and we'll get to show everybody. It'll be a show and tell. In come all of the prop guys and the first ADs and all of these people. They looked, he picked up my blaster, literally threw it at me across the table and said, this is crap, you know, we're making a big science fiction film for a Hollywood director, and they went off to get me fired. And
wow.
Everyone says, what did you think? And I thought, you know what? With 4 months, I'd become friends with George. I knew what we were doing. I knew what was required. And I just said, I don't care from now on. And John Barry and I took that attitude and stuck with George, not with the crew who were awful to George, most of the time, especially the heads of department. I just stuck to my guns and made the film that I wanted and George wanted. It was, for me, it was a labor of love, you know, and we weren't being paid much. I didn't care. I mean, this was a dream job for me. And I also got through childhood reading King Arthur and legends and myths. So I understood when I read this script that this had a lot of depth to it behind the kind of fun journey, which is how myths are. They're supposed to be. So I understood a lot about the power of doing this. So also before we moved, I was driving around London thinking, how am I going to do these sets? What am I going to do? Because we don't have the money and I won't have the time. And having seen all this junk in the army shop and everything, and I thought, you know what, if I got airplane junk, I could make it look like, because I've been on a submarine, and I thought I could make it look like a submarine, like used and real. So again, I went in kind of crossing my fingers behind my back to see John Barry and George Lucas and Gary and said, I've got an idea. If I got a load of airplane junk and scrap, I could build those into the sets and make it look like it should look. I honestly think that because George was an independent filmmaker, because he'd made THX on the streets in Los Angeles, made props out of motorbikes and cars and things, changed things around, he understood what I was saying, and they just, do it. And that was the second thing. When I got into EMI, they put me in a little prop plane with Robert Watts, and we flew around 4 airfields in Britain, and I was just shocked. I got to the first one. Honestly, there's a mountain of airplane junk. There were Rolls-Royce engines piled in the rain. There was airplanes. I was like, wow. And it cost nothing. I think I did the whole of Star Wars for £50. No one wanted it. You know, an airplane junk sold by weight, so it had no value as metal. So out of the 4 airfields, I bought so much stuff.
That's amazing. And I bet you were like a kid in a candy store walking into the airfields, like seeing all this stuff, like, ooh, I could use something for that, from this.
Yeah, I mean, it was just so I was just buying as much as I could because, again, I didn't know what I needed or how it would work out. And I thought, wow, these engines, I think I bought about 8 of the engines. Like, I didn't know what to do. And it's Frank Bruton was the big property master. Frank did Stanley Kubrick's movies and David Lean's. I mean, and he was one of the really few wonderful people on that film. And thank God he was there because it got me through. So and I was so young, he used to call me boy. He said, okay, boy, what do you want? And I said, look, there's no curtains, there's no furniture. Strip out the prop room, put in some metal shelves. That's all I need. And he looked at me and said, okay. So the day the first low loader came in, it was backing in, honestly, with roped on was a mountain of airplane parts and jet engines, everything. It was backing in. He's next to me, and I know he didn't look at me. He just said, you know, you're mad, boy. And I had to say, I had thought, well, but bless him, he said, okay, tea's on in my office. Get in there in 5 minutes. You tell me what you need me to do. So I did. I told him I need to get tools. I need to train these prop boys to break down the jet engines. I think we break everything down into components, put them on shelves, because submarines, airplanes, I'd seen B-52 bombers and things. Everything's in duplicate or triplicate in case it fails, and it's placed in an engineering way. And I somehow had enough gumption of engineering to know that you don't just stick stuff on a wall and hope it'll look right. So I trained the prop boys, and that's what we did. You know, the draftsmen thought I was nuts. I mean, they would get the drawing, a sketch from the designer, traditionally, break it down, do drawings of everything, component drawings. They would be sent to workshops and they would be built and then assembled, and then it would come out the other end after the painting. We didn't have time to do that. So eventually John Barry kind of got them trained, and I eventually saw, because they would just come and think I was nuts, honestly. And then John trained them, like when they were doing the cantina, they would come down and they'd pick airplane parts, take them up, put them in the drawings, and they got anodized in gold and were used above all the drink containers. And I'd bought a ton of PVC piping. There were drain pipes and water pipes up to sewer pipes. And I bought a whole stack. It was cheap. And I knew we could put piping everywhere. So when my water pipes joined everything up, it became a value of how to do this. And in fact, the first set that John Barry did was the Millennium Falcon cockpit. And that, see, there was so little money, there was no way to do hydraulics to shake it. So he built it on truck tires with huge beams coming out. So the props, well, the grips actually could do this and shake it and make it move.
Wow.
And John Barry had hired Harry Lang. He was an art director on 2001. So he thought he'd be useful. And Harry did how he did 2001. He got some nice switch panels made up. He made the whole thing look beautiful. And I kept going into him saying, Harry, I'm going to come and mess this up. And he'd kind of look at me thinking, who's this boy coming in here telling me all this stuff? And eventually he finished and he said, okay, here you are. What do you want to do? So I took his seats out and I put in 2 old fighter jet seats that had the ejection seat mechanisms, and they look better. I thought they're more junky, and I just started adding bits in all over the place. Got it to a point where I thought, okay, this looks like the Millennium Falcon, and we called George down. Now, this is the first set, right? And George just took one look, and that was it, smiling, and that was the mark of appreciation. He loved it. And I said, listen, George, I like to personalize sets. I like to give character. And when you look at Han Solo, he's a gambler. I think we should put a pair of dice hanging in the cockpit, because you had dice in American Graffiti and Ron Howard's car, and everybody in America wanted dice in their cars at that time. So he said, oh, that's a good idea. So I got 6 pairs, the big fluffy ones down to little silver ones, and George chose the silver ones, which was the ones I chose, and I hung those in. Therein lies another story, because the director of photography, who was against George from the moment he was hired, I don't know what happened to this man. He was so rude and unhelpful all the way through. After the second shot, apparently he got fed up with them, and so he pulled them out. So they're in Star Wars in the movie. They're in 1 or 2 shots, and then they disappear. I was telling this story, and I was on Ask Me Anything on Reddit, and I was telling this story, and then she said, oh, you know what? We just had a text come in saying, have you seen the Vanity Fair cover for A Force? No, it was then for The Force Awakens. And so we looked, and there's the photograph in the Millennium Falcon, and there are the dice hanging there. So J.J. Abrams had got an assistant go and search anything that looked like my originals. They went in, but that set scene got cut out, so they didn't appear there. They appeared later when Luke gives it to Leia as a memory of Han Solo, when he gives her the dice. So they kind of came to recognition in the end. The only thing was, mine was silver. I think whoever went and got them, when they looked at the film, the light made them look like they were gold, and they'd found gold pairs then. But they actually were silver, the originals.
Wow.
This happened to quite a few props and stuff going on that we did. The other thing that we had problems with, and this was kind of singled out in Lee when we were there, is the land speeder, because that was hovering. There was no way to do that. So we thought, well, why don't we do a 3-wheeler? At least you'd hide the front wheel. The special effects boys in their workshop had a Volkswagen hippie bus. They cut the top off. So we got the chassis and cut off half a motorbike, the front, and Bill welded those two together with George watching. George said, well, that's the worst bit of welding I've ever seen, Bill. And Bill said, well, I'm actually not a welder. I'm actually a carpenter. So he welded the front on, and then Bill had some polystyrene at home, and he had some bits of timber. So we made a mock-up, and then John Barry based it on the script. So George saw our mock-up, the first one, and said, no, it's way too big, and it's a 4-seater, because it had to have Luke, Obi-Wan, R2-D2, and C-3PO in it. And George said, no, I think Luke would have a little sports car, old one. So we made a second one, which was a 2-seater. And George said, don't worry, I'll work out how to fit them in. It would look more realistic. The welded one with the motorbike on the front, they tried out. Now, it happened to be Gary Kurtz came with his wife, Meredith, at that time. And they drove it down the alleyway. It crashed. The wing fell off. Everything fell to bits. It was just stuck together. It was a mock-up. And I heard her say, wow, this sure ain't Hollywood, is it? But soon as we got to EMI, again, everyone realized there wasn't time to make this, and we didn't have the wherewithal to do it. This short prep time of 2.5 months. So I'd seen little Ogle V cars, they're called Ogle, beautiful little sports cars. They were tiny. They were near the studios, so they were commissioned to make this land speeder based on our mock-up and Ralph McQuarrie's and John Barry's drawings. So they actually used the Robin Reliant, which is a 3-wheeler, which is famous for Mr. Bean. And they cut the top off and then built the land speeder around that. And in fact, if you look at them, the dashboard is a Reliant Robin, and the steering wheel and everything, it's all the same. I dressed a few bits on it, but and when we were back in Lee's with Bill's mock-up, we thought, let's make it look a bit better. There was a smashed up Jensen nearby. So Bill went down and negotiated, and we got the rear windscreen for 10 shillings out of the Jensen, and we stuck that on, and that became the windscreen, kind of the prototype for them to build everything. It was kind of done like that, which to me was fun. You know, it's a great way of doing it, but most film would never allow you to do stuff like that.
Yeah, back then you Frankensteined everything. From, your blasters to your
it's fun.
Speeder. Yeah,
it was always fun, and we kind of. I then got my buyer on in January, and I said to him, "Listen, Peter, just get me junk, get me broken calculators, broken camera parts, anything you can think of." One day he came back and said they're pulling down a telephone exchange in West Hampstead to create a brand new system. We can have it all. And I said, let's get it. We went there and got everything out of this, switches and pipes and all sorts of amazing stuff. I collected so much stuff. Nothing was ever like, oh, this will make that, or this will make that prop. I just got anything I could think that I could go in and say, oh, I could use that. I got so much stuff, I had to move to the next office. And I got piles of super glue. I mean, my fingers, they're still ruined to this day from the amount of super glue that I used. But that became the kind of way to do things that kind of I realized would work. And John Moller, the costume designer, was always in my office grabbing stuff for his costumes, everything. You know, it became a kind of treasure den. And I was getting the props ready. So the first thing we ever filmed to schedule was in Tunisia. And they wanted to get in and out before the heat. So everything had to go on trucks down through 5 countries. That was the only way to do it. John Barry had designed incredibly clever sets that would all go inside. He went one was slightly smaller because there was a sand crawler, and on the recce we'd found that where the exterior of the cantina and Mos Eisley was a beautiful old sandy square, the buildings around, you know, and John saw it and had those domes on the top and thought, wow, this is like an alien planet. And he'd taken George there up front as soon as we got to Lee's. So he designed a crashed spaceship. You know why? This is where they walk into the cantina, because right behind it is a beautiful olive tree. And it just ruined the look of the set. Now, these are poor farmers. You couldn't cut it down. So John designed a crashed spaceship the size of a Boeing 747. And again, it was another case where they thought I was absolutely mad. I took scrap. I was piling it onto trucks. And there is none in Tunisia. It was a very poor country at the time. It's why we could afford to go there, and the look was exactly Tatooine. John didn't have to build anything. All he added was the cantina door and a few more domes, and the rest of it we dressed, like the moisturizers. I dressed in panels, and I bought a lot of those cabinets on airliners where they heat the food, the metal ones. I thought these are good. I bought loads of those. And to do the Death Star in the studio, again, he couldn't do it to the scale or afford it. So we found a very early version of a PVC printing machine. And John printed out panels in like floppy PVC. They were fairly plastic, but they stapled those onto the walls to make all the Death Star, and it made to scale. So I thought these look interesting. So I took a whole load of those down. And in fact, for the crashed spaceship, I got up myself on a ladder and we stapled them on. And then I got a blowtorch and burnt them down and painted them down. So it looked like an old crashed spaceship. So it was there to hide an olive tree. But when you think about it, every single Star Wars movie since then has crashed spaceships as part of the atmosphere. I mean, Ray lives in one and scavenges parts from one. So it kind of created a look for the universe, which is quite interesting. Before we went, I got called into the office with Les Dilly, with John Barry, and he said, listen to me, that we start shooting with R2-D2. He said, you're going to be miles out in the desert. They're never going to work. The radio control one that John Steers says are fantastic and will work. So he said, build a very lightweight fiberglass one that you can pull on fishing wire and hide it. And don't tell anyone. And only Gary Kurtz knew. And we did. We hid it in the truck. So the first morning of shooting, when we got to that, was this scene where they're buying R2-D2 and C-3PO on Cologne. C-3PO starts the scene. He wobbles out, crashes over, hits another robot. Cut. What are we going to do? And John Steers, who's the special effects designer, who obviously had this excuse that he used in London all the time, that he said in front of the crew, he said, the taxis, they're ruining my radio control. Now we're 3 hours, probably 2 hours from the nearest little tiny sleepy desert town, Tozeur. There was one taxi, the rest were camels or donkey carts. So Gary Kurtz looked at Les and said, let's get the monofilament one, which Les didn't know what monofilament was because it's an American term. I said, it's the fishing wire. So we got it out. We laid boards down flat, put a bit of sand on the front and pulled him on fishing wire. No one ever saw it. No one noticed. But nearly every one of R2-D2, the only one where he works, where the camera was away, was when he's going down in the valley when he gets zapped by the Jawas. That one, for some reason, worked, and I think he was going down a slope. But otherwise, I think every shot of him moving around in three-legged form, we pulled on fishing wire.
Wow.
And George avoided the shots. There was lots like that. They were testing out the land speeder on the shots, and these are 250,000 acres of just, they're ancient salt flats, actually. And I'd noticed the mirage always, when you look there, that was very confusing. I just one day suggested, you know what, why don't we, if we stuck a mirror 45 degrees like a skirt on the side of the land speeder, I think it would reflect the desert. You wouldn't see anything. And to make it even more, I got a little old brush from one of the Tunisian workers and stuck it on the front, and it kicked up a bit of dust. You could see that in a lot of the shots, and later on George could digitize it, but some of the shots worked like that. It was a real testament to kind of string and sealing wax, we call it in England, make everything work. And one of the first props that was needed was Luke's binoculars, the binobins. So I got in my office. I had all these old broken camera bits. So I found a UMIG, which I really like. Yeah, here it is. So I stuck a stills camera piece on the back, again, super glue. I only made one, and that had a flip up viewer and another piece for the middle. And I thought that looks pretty cool, actually. But for the audience to kind of know what it is, I'll go to the camera store we used in London and buy 2 lenses, cheap lenses, stick them on the front. While I was in there, David French was the manager, and he rented out cameras for press when they used period cameras and stuff, rented out equipment. So I said, David, listen, I got to make this weapon, and it's eluding me. I can't find anything. And I said, it's a kind of sword. Now, privately, I knew that when you think about King Arthur, it's Excalibur, which is the icon of the King Arthurian tales, and I, as a kid, was always playing sword fighting with my sticks. So I thought, wow, if this ever is going to work, this film, what George had written was laser swords. I thought, these are really cool. If I could find something that would actually represent the kind of weapon of the Jedis, and this was like Buddha. This was, to me, I recognized the power. So I said, David, have you got anything? I can't find anything. And so he's suggested a torch, which I said no. The special effects tried those, and this is one of the few things that was never illustrated by Ralph McQuarrie, except in one painting with Darth Vader actually is having a lightsaber, and it looked like a kind of medieval lance. It didn't look anything, so the torches were rejected by George. And he said, well, go and have a look under the shelves over there. There's a ton of stuff I haven't looked at for years. And the first box I pulled out, literally, I undid the box, took the top off. There was tissue paper, and in there was this, which is a Graflex battery container. The battery was inside. This clipped onto the Graflex camera, and there was a silver bowl on the top, and you put a flash bulb in, and that was the go-to press camera for the paparazzi in the 40s. And I just held it and went, this is the Holy Grail. And I thought, wow, I could just use it like it is. It was just such a beautiful object. And you don't really know what it's for. So I raced back to the studios, and I thought, well, I'd better make a handle. And I had T-strip left over from the blaster. I had a bit left in the office, so I stuck 7 round. I just stuck them by hand. I didn't do any measuring or anything. I just thought, if I get 7, that'll fit. And then in here, that I didn't like the clip. I thought, I can't leave that. And I'd broken down a Texas Instrument calculator, and the bubble strip that illuminated the numbers and magnified them, it just fitted perfectly in here. So that went in, and I thought, that looks like something that, is part of the Jedi's, how they communicate with their lightsaber. And called George over and said, George, you better come. I think I found the lightsaber. And George took it, held it, it's weighty, smiled. That was it. Eventually he just said, look, I don't need it firing in the desert, but we need a D-ring on the end. Could you get one on? So I didn't have the tools to do that. I only had pliers and a screwdriver.
And a lot of super glue.
And masses of super glue. And I should have had shares in it. So I'd hired a friend of mine who made metal sculptures we created a new position of special effects model maker assistant. And Roger, again, they didn't give him any tools and they didn't give him any spare parts or anything. He couldn't go and do anything, but he had boxes from stuff at home. So he had a load of D-rings, so he stuck one in the end, and that was it. And while that came up, there was a discussion, how are we going to do the blade? So part of the discussion with George that we had with him was they should be like samurai. The blades should not go through, even though they're light blades, they should hit like swords. I said, well, I was doing some art installations and we painted some stuff with front projection paint and we got a glow actually in the installation. They said, oh, that's a good idea, Roger, you do that. So there was a meeting with the special effects and Gil Taylor, the photographer, and I mentioned this and he said, that's not going to work. I don't want that. It'll ruin my lighting, and walked off. George just said, Roger, do it. So I got sticks that were balsa wood sticks, fairly lightweight, but they were the length of a blade of a sword. We painted it with front projection paint. I made 2 or 3 of these handles. I made them up like Luke's, gave one to the special effects boys. And here John Steers was clever. They drilled out the front here in there. They drilled this out and put in a motor so that it could turn, which would help. But he also set it minusculely off center, so it actually kind of faintly vibrated. And that was amazing, genius idea, because we tried it and it worked. And also when Alec Guinness and Dave Prowse did the fight, because that's the only one in the first Star Wars, they could hit the sticks on each other, so it gave them a stop point to make this better. They broke so many, I can't tell you. We were constantly redoing them, but it worked. And then George could hand paint by rotoscoping afterwards just to make the blade. I mean, that's how that was done. And that's the most iconic prop apparently now in the history of cinema, I'm told, that I made for $15 probably.
Wow.
Because there's been so many stories and it was never shot like George always said, I'm making a documentary with Star Wars, and it was never like, here's a lightsaber pointed out, close-ups, button going. Obi-Wan takes it out of the box. You hardly see it, hands it to Luke. He does it, fires it up. You never see the end of it on screen. You never see a lot of it. It's just there. And there have been so many discussions and rows and arguments over there was only one, and I say I made more than that. No, you didn't. There's only one. Somebody found, because we had a load sent to the special effects, and like when Mark was doing the training with a training ball, it hurt his hand, my rubber, so they built him ones that's soft. They made some special effects ones. And one of those effects ones was found at the end of shooting on the lot. It was thrown out. That got found. So in fans' law, that was it. That's the one. This is how it is. This has got a D-ring like this on the end. And I was saying, sorry, that was a special effects one. I made them. So I should know. Yeah. I should know. And then I made this documentary, which will come out once we get the sales done and everything. I've finished it now. It's 2.5 hours, 20 fan special from the book of every single story on Star Wars, how we made everything, because it's a legacy and it's not in any of the making of documentaries. So I interviewed David French, and he tells the story how I came in and talked about him and getting the Graflexes, and because he rented them out. And then he was asked what happened then. And he said, well, I got a call saying, do you have any more of these? And he said, yes, I do. How many do you want? And then they said, well, how many have you got? And he said, well, I could give you 30, because he rented these cameras out. He had a huge store of them. And so 33, because I'd got the first 3, went to EMI Studios. And then he was asked, well, how much did you get? And he said, well, the prop master, Frank Bruton, called me up and said, do we owe you anything, David, for these? And he said, yeah, 33 handles I sent. So he charged £850.
Wow.
And David French to this day tells me I completely ruined his business, because now he can't get any spares. He has to spend thousands of dollars now because everybody wants them. So that's the story of the lightsaber. And just to finish that story, George commissioned my short film I'd written, because I wanted to direct by the end of Alien and Life of Brian. And so he commissioned the short film Black Angel to go out with Empire Strikes Back. So I was busy, and John Barry was making Saturn III. So they put Norman Reynolds, who was the art director on Star Wars, as designer. He'd hired a set decorator who I know very well. He's passed on now, but he should have been doing period films, not doing science fiction. You have to have an affinity for it. So he, I think probably they thought, oh, these will come unstuck, the T-strips on the barrel. They put rivets in it to hold them on. And I was just appalled, because I thought, this is a mystical weapon of the Jedis, and that made it handmade by humans, and I never liked it. And sadly, that went right the way through every Star Wars movie. So I was watching Obi-Wan Kenobi series, and in the last episode, of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi has to dig it up, because he's got to present it to Luke at some point. And I thought, what is David Filoni going to do here? Which one is he going to dig up? And I, God bless Dave Filoni, he dug up my original with no rivets.
Wow.
So it matched the original one, and Dave single-handedly has brought Mandalorian back to the fans. He brought everything that George did, we did, everything, all of that Star Wars vision back into that. He's been very clear about getting it right. So that's the end story of the lightsaber.
Wow, and it just, I bet it's just wild reflecting back and just being like, something that I made that everyone knows what it is, even if you don't know Star Wars, you know what a lightsaber is. You probably even had one when you were a kid, even though you never even watched the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's the perfect weapon. Everyone wants them. And look, now ours never work. Now they light up. The blade's got all different actions in it. They've got amazing sounds, everything. And in fact, I was with Star Wars Theory on a long podcast with him. We were talking about this because no one's ever actually been able to do the original. And I said, I'm thinking of doing one. And he went, oh, God, you're going to put us all out of business. So I joined forces with him. And it's done now. It's being made, because his Theory sabers are beautiful. They're so good.
They are beautiful.
So it's actually called Roger Christian Origin Saber. So it's like the very first one, what I handed and made out. So I'm able to do it because I'm calling it the Roger Christian Origin Saber. So that'll be coming, I think, end of this month. It's finally going to be out, and that'll have all of the light blades and everything working.
Well, I'm going to have to keep my ear and eye out for that, because it would be an honor to definitely have one that I know for a fact that you designed.
Yeah, well, it's all signed and everything. They're beautifully made. They're doing it now, and that he wants to do a collector's edition of one of 200 numbered and everything. So I said, okay, he knows the market. His are beautiful. His are selling very well. So we'll do a first run, and then probably I'll do a lower budget range, because I think every kid wants one. including every adult kid.
Yep. Every big kid.
Yeah, so that'll be the first one, and I've got some ideas after that too. So, because I've never done anything like that. The book, as you know, I wrote, that's relaunched right now, and it's another story because George doesn't do anything with Star Wars anymore. It's gone for him, and he's out of it. And they decided to republish it. And they asked me, we want to update it. Can we just do a new forwards and stuff? And he said to me, actually, he said, I know George doesn't do anything, or Ridley is too busy and won't, but could you get someone to do a forward for it just to make it a bit special? And I thought then, George has always said to this day that there were only 5 people stuck right by his side to get that film made. And I thought, I've never asked him for anything really, so I sent him a message, and it came back immediately saying, can you wait 3 weeks? George really wants to do this. So it's here. I don't know if you can see here, if it's not reflecting. So on the cover now, it's got terrible, oh, wait a minute, I'll do it that way, then it won't reflect. So it's got a very beautiful blurb on the cover, with George Lucas's name now is on the cover, which is really special for me. And he wrote the most beautiful foreword, and in fact talks about there the day that I called him over and I brought out an old piece of a camera and showed him a lightsaber, and he said, yeah, that was just one of 15 things probably Roger was doing in that day. And I got David West Reynolds, who wrote the Star Wars dictionary and everything. He's written a beautiful foreword explaining how he found me and why he forced me to write the book and all this stuff. So it's very special. That's now out. It's on Amazon. And if I go to events, I'm signing these whenever. I have to buy them from Titan, but they're too heavy to carry around. But if I take some, then... And I just thought it's a legacy, this film is going to be studied for centuries in universities and everything. I mean, it is unique on the planet. There's nothing else like Star Wars. And I think that in the end, I had to write the book as a legacy and explain how we did it, because, John Barry died very young, meningitis. So I'm the only one with the stories. So I kind of owed it to the fans, really. And this documentary is the same, because they all asked me, because I tell these stories a lot and talk and, at events, and they said, you've got to do it and tell the stories yourself. So that's almost done. And I'm really, Guillermo del Toro wanted to be in it. And Guillermo, he's a director after seeing Star Wars when he was a young kid. And he's very erudite about Star Wars and the culture and people in it. And Gareth Edwards, who directed Rogue One, he goes throughout the whole documentary. He's the kind of headline of the different sections, really, of explaining it. So it's got a lot in it, a lot of stories. So
I actually ordered the book yesterday because
did you?
I'd like to dive into it.
People do like it, and unfortunately, the publishers don't do anything. I go to events now in America, and no one's ever knew the book was out. It's been out since 2016, but they don't seem to want to do anything unless you're J.K. Rowling. So I decided, I have to do this myself now, because I'm trying to make movies. We spend years trying to get financing and doing it, and I thought, and so many fans ask me, and I realize this doing podcasts with Star Wars Theory, and I've done them and yours and other people's, and people want to hear the stories. And I like meeting the fans. I like that, George made these movies for children, and it's not his fault. Adults like them just as much, but he made them for family entertainment. And I get so many parents with children, and I see how much of a communication kind of it opened up communication between parents and children. It's given them something common where there isn't much these days. And so, I support this movie no end. So I'm out doing as much as I can now, whenever I can. I have to go to Spain at the end of this month.
Comment on that, like with my daughter, she just turned 6, and the reason I got into building props and making armor and all that was because my daughter came up to me she was 4, and she said, "Dad, I want to be Baby Yoda for Halloween." And I was like, "Oh, awesome, get you a costume, let's do it." And she picked out the costume, and she goes, "Dad, I want you to be Mando." And I go, "Okay, yeah, I'll get a costume, let's do this."
Really?
And she goes, "No, Dad, I want you to be Mando." So I bought a 3D printer, and I figured it all out, and I painted it all up, and she didn't even know anything about it. And I walk into her room the day of Halloween, fully dressed, and my daughter really thought I was Mando, like freaking out, shaking, and gave me a big hug. And it was just like, and what you were just commenting on, and how Star Wars, can bring families together. And it was just so amazing to be able to see my daughter light up like that. Like something that we saw on TV on a screen was actually 100% real. And that's what's kind of kept me going through all this.
Yeah, it's what it was. George created a myth for the age. He created something for people to believe in, that when there wasn't much, and there's less now. That's why, that's why I support this and do what I can. I just think it's so important. And it all came from George, everything. It's not like, look what I did. I don't do it that way. At the end of my book, as you'll read the last line in my book, you will understand it. It says, "Don't let anyone tell you can't, you can." Yeah. It's a simple way of saying you're your hero's journey. Everybody's the same. Doesn't matter what you do in life. It's do it to the best, be passionate about it, and believe in yourself, and just do it, And this, I see it with my kids. I mean, I just think, nowadays they're buried in Nintendos and YouTubes and TikToks and everything, and it's there's a bigger divide. Star Wars is really a communicator, and it's we need it. Everybody needs it. So yeah, you're a living example. You see.
Yeah, and it's kind of just taken off from there for painting and doing stuff, making droids. And I just never in a million years thought, like in high school, I could always paint, I could always draw. I got into art school, but like I never thought I would actually do anything with it. So it's just been a hell of a ride.
There you go. And now you're doing podcasts and all of this. So it's yeah. That's why I do it.
Now, you commented earlier. You said that you would go in and just buy as much, basically junk, and you would use it later. Is that still in your bones, where like you have a garage just full of just like airplane parts? Because I have a hard time believing that's like completely gone. Like,
no, unfortunately, no. And I mean, after that, and Alien, it changed the whole landscape in Britain. Then they realized, wow, this stuff's worth money. So now you could only rent it. And in fact, I was directing second unit on Phantom Menace. Rick McCullum told me when I got there and said, "Oh, you got the airplane junk?" And he said, "Yeah, I couldn't get it. We couldn't afford it in England. It was cheaper for them to go to the graveyards in Texas and fly it in an industrial plane into London."
Wow.
That's how much the landscape's changed. Mine, everything, most stuff went because I was in England, then we moved to LA, and then back to England, then back to LA, and then now to Canada. I mean, it just, stuff eventually all got missing. So no, I have a few bits and pieces, but not much.
I just see you like walking into an antique store and be like, you know what? I'm going to buy that just to break it. Parts off of it.
I see this stuff all the time thinking, wow, that's cool. I could do something with that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
But I do it on the movies, obviously, that I'm making. Then I'm doing stuff then and showing people, and we do things that way.
I got a big question. Was there ever a moment like when George was presenting like an idea or a concept that he wanted you to build in? Like I need the like the lightsaber, and you like questioned your abilities. Like, there's no way in hell I could do this. Like, was there a specific prop or a scene where you were just like, this ain't gonna happen, but it just magically came together?
George's talent is to hire people who have a bit of experience, but not enough to go, you know what, Gov, that's not how we do things. This is how we've always done it in the past, and it works. He hired people who would read his script that was impossible to make, half of it, and they'd figure it out. So George never ever came to me and asked me for anything. I just had the script and I had to make it work, same as John Barry. So that's why early on in Lee Studios, he said, George, I'm going to take you to Tunisia. John Barry had designed The Little Prince there and said, I think we could do Tatooine. It's incredibly cheap there and it's safe at that time. Then it was, and it's very near to London. It's a simple flight. So that's how Tatooine came from Tunisia, and the solution of Luke's homestead was the Matmata caves. These are 1,000-year-old underground caves, and when George saw that with John Barry, and he said, we can shoot the courtyard there, and then when we're down in the shot, I'll build the top of it, and you have that part, so you just have to link it in by editing. So that was the solving of the problems. And even when we left Mexico, John Barry actually went to San Francisco and met with George and met with Ralph McQuarrie. And John even then explained to them, I can't build a whole Millennium Falcon. We don't have the money all the time. We can do a matte painting and I can do half of it. So I learned this story from Paul Bateman, who became a dear friend of Ralph McQuarrie's. He looked after his artwork and everything for him, got things done for him. Ralph McQuarrie went home and thought, matte painting, I see. Oh, you read about it. Oh, you do it on glass. He didn't have any glass. He took off his shower door
Wow.
and painted the matte painting on that. And then he was in LA. He realized, I've got to get this to the effects boys in ILM. He tied it onto the top of his old car. This was a glass door. Drove it. Paul told me and drove it up there.
I would have been freaking out.
Yeah. But, this is basically, so everything, I just had the script and I knew what I had to do and I just kept giving it to George. And this actually came to light when I think I was mixing a film in Oakland, and I'd always do my sound mixes there. They were one of the best. I got a call from Rick McCullum saying, could you come and see us? So I said, well, I'm in Oakland. So I drove up and met Rick, and there was a problem over one art director's credit that he wanted me to solve for him because John wasn't there anymore. We solved that. He said, listen, George wants to see you. And I went to the office. That's when George actually said, Rick, there were only 5 people stood by me, and Roger was one of those at that time. And then they said, why don't you come to eat at Leavesden? We're going to be making the next film. And I said, yeah, I'll be back in London. Okay. Thinking nothing of it. And then when I was there, I got a call from Rick saying, why don't you come and see us? So I drove up. And they said, oh, go and see Gavin, who was the designer. So I go to Gavin, and Gavin said, what do I do? I don't understand. George doesn't say anything. How do I, and I say, Gavin, you give him what you interpret off the screen, and you know what Star Wars is. Now you've got a huge history to dwell on. Present it to George, and if he likes it, you'll get a smile. If he doesn't like it, he'll explain to you, and you build up the rest together. Same with the set decorator who was panicking. He said, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do it with George. He doesn't. And I said, just do it. You have to give him. You have to present it to him. And that's the way that George works. So, and the director of photography, David Tattersall, funny enough, I started in the industry. I took him to Italy to do some huge car commercials. I'd seen his very rough reel, and I thought, this kid's talented. So he looked at me and he said, Roger, why aren't you doing second unit? They're trying to shoot this whole huge film in 12 weeks. It's never going to happen. And so I went to Rick and I said, who's doing second unit? Oh, we don't need second unit. He said, Ben Burt's going to do a few shots for us. We really don't need it. And I said, listen, Rick, I love this world and I've done it on Jedi. Just put my name down. And went away. Sure enough, I got a call. I was back in London. Can you come and see us? And I drove up and I'm sitting in the office with George and Rick. And I was explaining to George how I cope with my second unit directors, because they all want to get a job. So they're doing stuff you don't need to impress the producer. And I explained how I did it with little camera. I filmed things, and I had a little clamshell, which was a portable viewing device, and I'd have them show me, and we did it. And George said, Rick, buy exactly that. I want all of that on board. And then they said, well, can you do second unit? Can you actually do it? You offered. And I said, yeah, I can. I have to go back to Vancouver to do a bit of digital work on I think it was on Masterminds. And they said, no, you've got to start right now. We're going to leave. We'll give you 5 minutes. You make a decision. So they left. I made a very quick phone call. The DP said he would go to Vancouver and do what I needed. And so I said, okay. They said, come with me. They already had my office set up. They already had an assistant in the office waiting for me and a meeting. And then I understood, because that schedule was so tight that I had to shoot the Senate, with the big pods flying around. My unit had to go first in there. We became first unit at that time. And this happened on about 5 or 6 big scenes they couldn't schedule. So they what they'd done is got the 2 teams who Rick McCallum had produced for Young Indy and been trained over 6 years. They were brilliant. So David Tattersall was DP on one, Giles Nutcombe was the second one, and they would leapfrog. One would rest while the other shot. Brilliant crews. They were so well trained and ironed out, and problems and everything. So that's how that kind of came about. And really, if you look at ILM, Joe Johnson was a surfer who didn't know anything about film. They just found out he needed a job, and he got paid, and they found out he could make models and draw and design, and so he went on. It's him who kind of designed the Millennium Falcon. And Richard Edlund and John Dykstra, who were doing bits and pieces, they were presented with this script that was impossible to do, and they had to actually invent a computer to do motion capture, motion control. John Mollo, the costume designer, was never a designer. He was the wardrobe master. But George kind of knew he could equip armies. He knew he had something that would be able to translate, that would do what he needed for this. And this was right across the board. So I just myself had to get my list for everything that needed to be done and get it done. It was just down to me. It was daunting. I mean, there were days, and I think I say that on Star Wars, I never had a day off for almost a year, ever. and I was working from early morning till late at night, and it was all consuming just to get through, to get it done. This was, we'd all meet in my office. I actually had some tea bags, a kettle, and a little tiny fridge with some milk in it. And the most important thing were McVitie's chocolate biscuits, which the British Film Industry ran on. And because the work was so intense in prep, they would meet in my office. John Barry, myself, Frank Bruton, the costume designer, the Bill Welsh, the construction manager, Les and Norman. And we'd discuss things that we had to do. And one day it came up at like 3 p.m. and Norman took him on, was really trying to reinvent armatures and leg movements so that it would work. And they were talking about the eyes. And I kind of opened my mouth and said, I hated robots that you could see the eyes behind. It just gave it away. And I was thinking that, why don't we put a one-way mirror in the little eyepiece, and then it would reflect what's outside of it? Oh, you do that then, Rog. So I had enough to do. Suddenly I got to do the eyes. And the big thing for me was Ralph McQuarrie had drawn them lit up. And I thought, what a good idea. And of course, I got my buyer and I said, what about Christmas lights? They get hot. You can't do it. So by sheer chance, I'd seen a documentary on the first camera they put down inside a human being one night. And I said, go to hospitals, Chase, you've got to find these. And he did, he found. And so they didn't get hot. So I drilled 3 holes, and I got a little local company, made the eyes, made the grids for me. I got company to one-way mirror, little plus plexiglass, and made a hole in the middle of it so it looked like a pupil, and he could kind of see out of there. And it worked. We had to somehow hide the battery in amongst his costume when we got down to it, but it worked. It lit up, that I think, it's just, I just found solutions for everything. And often it was my instinct or believing I could do it. Honestly, the second set we did was the Hold, where the chess game is. That one, I started putting in airplane junk and putting in more and more, and kept ordering more and more from the scrap yards, and it looked terrible. And I was honestly, every day I was praying no one would come on the set and see, because I thought they will think I'm nuts. And I just kept at it, the prop boys. And then one day it was there, and we put in drips and we put in letraset numbers and did all of that stuff. And I saw people come on the set that day and their eyes wide open and going, wow, this is a ship. So it was my own kind of struggle that I kept quiet about. Because I didn't know it would work. I mean, it was just an idea of mine.
I love how you explained all that. As like, it seems like I feel like Star Wars was really successful because of the all-star cast he had, to build everything. But he gave you guys such artistic freedom to read something, interpret it, and make it your own.
It's true. It's true. Because George did that with the book, I just sent one back up to him, and I wrote inside it. And the first thing I said was, George, thank you for believing in John Barry and myself back in 1975, because I think even the posters, the beautiful early posters, he didn't employ all the big poster designers. He got a talent. He saw he was unknown and did the first posters, and then he became widely known. I think, look at the sound. Ben Burt. I mean, Ben Burt was a student at UCLA, and he had a particular fascination with sound. And George had asked the principal there, we need somebody to do some sound. And they say, why don't you talk to Ben Burt? He seems to really like sound. And Ben got hired, and again, what did he do? He didn't go off and buy a keyboard and do spacey sounds. He went into zoos and recorded walruses and pigs and dogs and played them backwards. And, he gives a description of how he created the sound for the lightsaber, which is equally as prominent and powerful in making this an iconic weapon as what I made. And it was all by accident. He used to work the projector at for the students at the cinema, and it had a big wheel, and he loved the sound, and he used to put his hand on the wheel and slow it down. He'd make different sounds out of it. And the other sound he was recording in his little studio in front of a cathode ray television, and when he passed the mic, it shorted out. Most people would chuck that away. You think, wow, that's an interesting sound. That's the first sound he ever put together. Those two joined to make the lightsaber. It's the first thing he ever did.
Wow.
It's the same story, which is, why in the end I've done this documentary, and I hope to get it out, because I think all of this, it's more than just like what we did. It's like anybody, it's got to just believe in yourself and go and do it. And these huge Hollywood films started with a ragtag group of kind of Sigma revolutionaries with no money and just got it done. And I think that's important for people to know, like yourself. Well, I got to make one. What can I do? I'm not going to let her down, my daughter. I'll make one. And it's turned into a lifetime's kind of mission for you. See, and that's why I do this. I love hearing these stories.
And that's always been my thing, is I love hearing the story behind everything. It's just like, I feel like me and you are kind of the same when it comes to, you see something, you want to know how it's made. Well, I want to know all of it, what all went into that. Yes. And the fact that you share everything is just absolutely amazing. And I will tell you, thank you so much for, sending me, the copy of your documentary. And it was absolutely amazing to watch. And I watched it 4 times because and I'm probably going to watch it again because
good. I'm glad.
Amazing.
It's just, I tried to, I tried to make things fun, and but I everything about that is a legacy just of how it's unique Star Wars. There's nothing like it on the planet. It's every village in China, there'll be a Star Wars doll. I mean, it's connected the world. And of course, it was all done with a reason, because George was mentored by the great Joseph Campbell, who studied mythology, and he taught him how to connect to the subconscious in people. And those connections are to find yourself growing up. It's important, and also look at, everyone says, oh, Ripley, the first, female superhero. No, Princess Leia is the first superhero. She's a feisty princess who goes to fight a huge empire with a group of revolutionaries. She's the first one. There's never that, everything before was a princess in trouble saved by the man or the knight,
Not with Leia.
So I'm very grateful and kind of honored to be part of it, really, from the early stages. And I've been quiet all these years, until David West Reynolds found me on Phantom Menace and said, for God's sake, Roger, I went through all the archives. I write in these books. I can't find out who made anything, who did all of this. And now I finally found you. So you're going to write about it. And
you're going to start talking, or else.
Start talking about it. Yeah, because fans need it. We need to know. Yeah. So that kind of, it's become a bit of a mission now for me.
Good. Now, got a question about, like, if, with all the accomplishments and props that you've made, and winning an Academy Award for being a part of all that, is there any prop that you wish you could go back with the modern technology that we have now with, like, 3D modeling, 3D printing, and redo it?
I don't think so, but it's as I've said in the book. with the lightsaber. Mine never worked. Nowadays, every kid can go and buy one and they work and something. So, I mean, it would have been great to have had that on the set, one of those that fired up and sound and everything, you know. Oh. That would have been really cool. But there's not really anything that I think we would have changed.
No. Well, it didn't have to be about Star Wars or just any prop that you ever, you know, like, hey, if I had a 3D printer, you know, in the 1970s that could print like this, it could have changed a lot.
Yeah, I guess, but you know, in the end, it's the experiences of doing it the way we did it gave me a kind of thorough understanding. And you know, I was just talking the other day, I made some robots for a children's TV series. They just asked me to do it as a fun guest to make for a series called Overlord and the Underwoods. And I had to we made a costumed lead character, and we made a little robot that worked, that was supposed to be his guardian, kept him in order. And I remember the company here, and I was trying to explain the way to do it because the writers and the showrunner and the producers here had never done it before, and they didn't understand the scale and everything. And I said, look, we all build models, just simple, get some cardboard, do it. Oh, that's old fashioned. We don't do that. You're old fashioned the way you used to do things. We do this all on the computer. And I thought, how sad, you know, that this has come to this. And in fact, in the end, it would have saved a huge amount of money and time if we'd done it my way, because nobody could understand on the computer. This went on and on, trying to get them to understand the scale and how this thing would work and everything. It wasted so much time, I can't tell you, hours and hours of Zoom calls and everything. And all we had to do, you know, I started with John Boxer. We made models. He made models of every big set, and the director could go on and play around with it. And ILM still build models. It's not old-fashioned. I was asked to help out. A director called me out of the blue called Duncan Jones and said he'd got a movie to make called Moon, and asked for my help. And he said, I've got 3 designers. Could you help me choose? And so I looked at them and I said, well, this one is going to want a big department. Don't do him. This one, no, he's going to want to do it certain ways and it won't work for you because you've got no money in the budget. And I said, choose this guy. And Tony Noble, he worked like I did, would make things and make it work and never go to the director and say, this doesn't work or I can't do this. He will always find a way to do it. And that's what he did. He made Moon, which is a fantastic movie, all models. All they did with CGI was clean bits art, but they made a whole moonscape. Bill Pearson, who's a genius model maker in London, who worked with us on all these big movies, very simple, just got paid what he got paid and did models. All of them are done like that with models, and it's not old-fashioned. It's just a simpler way to do things and to try things out like we did in the early days, you know. And yes, the computers are fantastic. We all use computers, but there's limitations in terms of seeing what, how relations of size, how things will work, how things will look. It saves so much money, you know. And even when Norman Reynolds was doing Raiders, everything, he made models of every set, and then the directors could go and look and see. And that way they'll say, you know what, we don't need that wall. That saves money from the budget, which they normally don't have. And so I still stick by my guns and do things like that. So if I can get made the Black Angel movie that George commissioned, that one is now being made into a feature. So after all these years, I'm making a feature of it now. and I have, it's an ancient kind of, it's the spaghetti western ancient epic, and I have got, I had my main mystic in it has a lightning wand. It's a wand that can fire lightning balls, and I've
Wow.
designed that. And like then I was looking the other day and I saw, oh, they have water pistols that fire little jets of water now, and I thought, wow, we could probably adapt one of those and use this on set. So no, I'm still at it.
Good, good.
and those will be 3D printed, and the armor and stuff. I have an amazing science fiction artist who's worked with me and designed the rings and everything, and she's 3D printing all of that. It makes life so much easier.
Oh.
So that I'm doing, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can see I can see both sides of it. Like, there, I see I feel like it's easy street for someone like me, like to, you load up a file, you print it, but then it comes into the hard part of, finishing it, sanding it,
Yes.
smoothing it. And, that's the art, that's the technique, that's the
Yes.
process. That's hard for a lot of people to ever, make it happen. But
Right.
like, there's another concept of thinking like of you where, you could walk in your backyard and you see, this, and this. I'm just going to bust that old shed down and I'm going to build Noah's Ark in the backyard. Like it's a different way of creating and how your brain works. And it's just amazing to be able to hear it all. Like, I have so much respect for that old prop, mindset of, taking a bunch of things that are real and turning it into something that's real. And it's amazing.
Yeah. It's actually, in the end, it's going to change in Hollywood. And if you watch The Creator that Gareth Edwards made, he did this. He went out and made a movie that should have been $300 million, and he made it for $80 million. It's a huge movie. And he used all of the kind of techniques that we had used and which he'd used for making Monster and then Rogue One and everything. And I think there's hope there, actually, in this way of doing things, because it's horrendously hard to get independent films made anymore and to get them in theaters and stuff. So there has to be a way to use the way that we did things on Star Wars. Even on Alien, it was very low budget Alien, a monster to make, but low budget. And to get things done that way, take away the control, take away the committees, take away everything being done the most expensive way and go back and do them and make it work. I think the future probably is there, actually, for this whole industry. And it needs a certain mindset, but you don't learn that now in film school. You don't learn it in watching Hollywood movies and everything. You learn it by going and doing it. Yeah. I think that's what I get out of it all nowadays. And so I'm teaching, I'm doing what I can, I'm lecturing whatever I can to try to inspire people, because I've got Star Wars and Alien in my resume and they listen. So I'm trying to encourage people, and I did it. I did a little screening in Scotland of Black Angel, and 3 students came to me and said, your talk, and it's so inspiring and everything. I got an email a year later and said, thank you, you inspired my kids who'd given up. They went and made a short film and now they've made a feature.
Wow.
So it's, we all need mentors. That's what I realized. This is the Star Wars story, and Obi-Wan is the mentor and Yoda is the mentor. We all need them. Everybody needs that. And you never know, one conversation can change someone's life.
Yeah.
So I do whatever I can, really, just to do this.
Well, you're killing it when it comes to that. I mean, you've influenced many different generations and in different ways of doing things, and the fact that you're going back and, you know, continuing to teach and explain, and you know, it's amazing that you're, you know, because there's so many people, you know, that have accomplished something in their life and then they want to hold it, they don't want to talk about it. Like a lot of prop makers in the community, they figure out a technique and they don't want to tell anybody about it. And the fact that you know, explain things and talk about it is, you know, inspirational to me, because, you know, with YouTube, you know, I things that I make, I love showing how I did it, because I want people to know, and I love that.
Yeah. And it's, you know, it inspires other people. It spreads, you know.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. So good. You carry on too, doing what you're doing.
I'm going to try my hardest just for you, Roger.
Good.
Last question.
Yes.
What is the biggest advice you would give to an aspiring prop maker or set designer, regardless of their original background? Kick us off.
I just think, I think that whether it directly influenced me or not, watching Kurosawa movies, and I encourage everyone, go and watch every movie of his. This man, they made the movies pretty low budget in Japan, but watch the art, watch how he organized the colors and the sets, and Mount Fuji became part of the drama and everything. I always tell people, watch that. Go and watch Tarkovsky movies, same, with no money under a communist regime, and watch this just to get a grounding of cinema, which you can believe in. And then, you know, you have also to kind of find your own voice. And you do that through working for other people, and do whatever you can. It doesn't matter if somebody says, do this small budget thing. You just do it and learn, because every time you're out there getting your feet wet, you're learning. And, you know, even prop making now, that there is a kind of new thing which we didn't have, which is YouTube and other venues, Instagram. You can make things and show people, and, you know, try to do things that you connect to do it, and just get to do it, you know. And there are jobs in movies. The art department is still very important. So are prop makers. You know, if everyone has their eyes on Hollywood, but there you'll get, you know, oh, you're in charge of wheels and you just do wheels. Whereas you do an independent movie, you're doing everything, like I had to do. And that's the best way to do it. And, you know, if you read my book, because it does tell you how
I'm going to.
I kind of instinctively chose things that connected to characters and connected to the action and everything that was required for that particular Star Wars, be it Life of Brian, be it Alien, and any other movie. I've always kind of, because there's never enough money. It doesn't matter if you do it yourself. It doesn't matter, even on James Cameron would tell you, even under a $400 million movie, he doesn't have enough money to do what he wants. So you're finding ways to do things, and just don't give up. You know, that's what, as I said, the last line in my book says, you just got to plow on with it. And I think, you know, there's nothing wrong in the past. Learn. I tell young directors this. They all want to be Hollywood. And I say, go and watch Sajid Ray movies who you've never even heard of. This man got Academy Awards for going into Indian villages and made drama. There's nothing wrong in watching the masters of the past. Don't dismiss them, because they tend to be nowadays, and watch how stories are made, you know. And, like, you know, the essence of props is, it's a property, but it belongs somewhere. It's part of a story. It's part of a film story a director's trying to tell. It's important that you don't just make something that you want to make. It's important that you make something that fits the story. And that way, then you'll get noticed. And collect junk, models, My son does it now. He takes the Lego things, we build them together, and it's great fun. But then he would break them apart and makes his own spaceships and stuff like that. It's inspiring me. Look at this. This is a Lego lightsaber he made for me.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah. So I've kept it. I said, I think I'm going to glue this and keep it because I think it's really...
You and the glue again.
Yeah. Yeah. Still use it.
Yep.
Bloody stuff. It just kills your fingers, but there you go.
Yep.
So I think if that inspires enough to do it, the David West Reynolds book is really good. The Star Wars Dictionary, he kind of breaks down a lot of the props and stuff for Star Wars. It's a very interesting book.
That's a book that I do not have, and I definitely want that book.
Yeah, it's little story just to end it with David. He's the one who created the crystal and how they do it. He didn't know who made the lightsaber, nothing, but he organized that. And then one day but David's story, very quickly, he's an archaeologist. He was in Egypt on a dig, complete Star Wars nerd, and thought, all these locations, they should be known to everybody to go and visit. He called up the ranch. No one knew anything. Everything was junked. No one believed in Star Wars. Called Robert Watts. He got hold of him. Robert Watts said, I don't know. We have no, there's nothing left. But he said, I know when you drive out of Tozeur towards the Algerian border, turn left. Well, it's 250,000 acres of desert, So David, on his own money, went, took clips of the film using his archaeological knowledge, worked out not only every location that we shot in Tunisia, but every camera angle. Wow. And because of that, Rick McCullum found out and flew him to Tunisia and had him teach the designer and the DP and everybody where we shot what we did. And they invited him to the ranch, and he became head of literature and wrote these books. So one day he did a drawing for one of the books of Yoda with the lightsaber. Everybody in Lucasfilm came down on him and said, you can't do that. That's not allowed. That's against the law. Take this down. You can't, everything. And he got a call from George to go to his office. He thought, oh, George is going to fire me himself. And George said, so is that right? You put the lightsaber in Yoda's hand? And David said, yes, I did. I'm sorry, if I upset. He said, no, it's a great idea. I'm going to give him one. Let's make a little one for him. So again, it's that little story is part of the universe,
It's wild. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And Roger, thank you so much for sharing your entire life. I mean, I feel like just in this video, like we not just got a snippet of you, we got all of you, and
good.
Us prop makers. I mean, we need to hear it, and as fans, we need to hear it. And thank you.
Not at all. Yeah, I have an agent now, so I do go to these events mostly in the East Coast. I'm doing another one in beginning of November, I think. Kissery, I think it is there. So, there's so many people come. It's great. We share stories and stuff. And so nearly all of them said, oh, we didn't know your book was out. So I do what I can to promote it because I want people to read it. It's not, I make nothing out of it. It's the publishers take everything. I have to buy them to take them to sell to people and autograph them. But it's more about, I want people to know the real history behind this great franchise. So there we are.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for watching this video with Roger, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Indeed. There's lots more stories. I'll speak to you soon. All the best. Keep making. I want to see what you make next.
Will do. We're going to.
Good.